They said the wind that day came from the desert, dry as judgment, sharp as bone. The rope creaked like an old floorboard in the gallows square. Dust whirled through Red Hollow, that brittle little town where even mercy came with splinters. Sheriff Harlan Pike stood under the half-dead oak, his hat low, jaw tight, and eyes that had long forgotten softness. Before him, barefoot, wrists bound, throat bruised, stood the girl they called Mara Vale, though half the town spat her name like a curse. Someone hissed, "Witch!" and a few others nodded because it made the fear easier to swallow. She'd been accused of poisoning the cattle of Judge Wexler, a man whose herd rotted overnight while her lantern still burned down by the river. No one cared to ask why she'd been out there. No one wanted her words, only her silence tied to a post. The sheriff's badge gleamed faintly, catching what little morning light dared to enter the square. Behind him, the crowd murmured. Behind the crowd, the mountains kept their silence. Only the wind spoke, brushing her loose black hair across her face. "Any last word, girl?" Harlan asked, voice low and hollow, like it had traveled a long road to reach her. Mara lifted her chin, her mouth cracked from thirst but steady. "You can hang me," she said, "but truth won't hang with me." The crowd shifted. That sentence, soft, stubborn, settled like dust on the sheriff's tongue. He turned away. The hangman reached for the rope. And then it came. A small shaking voice. "Don't, Mr. Sheriff." It was a child, a boy, no more than 10, standing near the trough with his father's hat slipping over his brow. His hands trembled, but he didn't drop the Bible clutched in them. "She fed my ma when no one else would," he said. "She ain't bad." The sheriff froze. That silence, that awful, widening silence, held the whole town in its grip. He saw the boy's father pull him back roughly, shame burning red on his face. But something inside the sheriff cracked, something that had been stone for far too long. He turned to the hangman. "Wait." That one word broke the wind's rhythm. The hangman blinked. What for? Harlan's eyes went to Mara again, the bruises, the dust, the defiance. "Take her down," he said quietly. The crowd gasped. Then the shouting began. Men barking about justice, women clutching their children, the judge storming through the front, with his cane pounding dirt. But the sheriff didn't flinch. "Take her down!" And when they did, he saw it. A small, leather-bound diary tied around her neck with twine. Not a Bible, not a talisman. A diary covered in dust and blood. The hangman tore it loose as she fell to her knees, and Harlan caught it before it hit the ground. The initials on the cover were not hers. They were his. H.P. He stared at those letters, his letters, stamped into the cracked leather. "You knew who I was?" "I knew what you forgot," she said. "You used to believe in second chances." He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the words shriveled in his throat. The wind howled through the cracks of the door. He thought of the gallows still standing outside, of the child's voice that had stopped it all. He opened the diary again, turning to the last page. "If the sheriff ever reads this, tell him the oath he swore ain't meant to blind him. It's meant to keep his eyes open." He shut the book, and for the first time in years, the sheriff prayed, not for the dead, not for justice, but for forgiveness. He didn't sleep that night, and when the morning came, the rope was gone from the gallows post. Only a small pile of ashes remained where it had hung. Some men are forged by war. others by mercy denied. By sunrise, the air in Red Hollow was thick with rumor and resentment. The gallows rope had been burned clean through, and no one saw who did it. Some said the girl used witchcraft. Others whispered that the sheriff had gone soft. Sheriff Harlan Pike walked through town like a ghost that had misplaced its grave. Every face turned as he passed. The blacksmith paused mid-hammer. The saloon piano fell silent, and Judge Wexler stood on the boardwalk, a cigar smoldering between two white fingers. "Sheriff," the judge called, voice heavy with power, "you got something to explain to this town." Harlan stopped. "You'll get your explanation," he said, "but not here." He led Mara Vale out past the last clapboard house, down to the river that curved behind the willows. The current whispered against the stones, steady and cold. Her hands were still bound, but she didn't look afraid anymore. There was something steadier in her now, as if she'd already been through a worse fire. He set the diary on a flat rock between them and struck a match. Flame bloomed, slow and deliberate. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Ending a lie," he said. The leather caught first, curling like skin under sun. The pages blackened, words turning to smoke that drifted toward the mountains. He watched until the cover cracked, and the last of his initials disappeared. When it was done, only ash and wind remained. He took out his knife and cut the rope from her wrists. She rubbed at the bruises where it had burned her skin. "That rope? You mean to leave it behind, too?" He nodded. "Some things don't deserve burying. They deserve to vanish." She looked up at him, eyes dark, unreadable, and for the first time, he saw the truth behind them. She wasn't trying to prove her innocence. She was trying to remind him of his own. They sat by the river until the sun climbed high. He told her how he'd once believed law was a straight road. No bends, no mercy. She told him how that same road had taken her family, her home, her name. When she finished, neither spoke for a long time. The wind carried the smell of ash and riverweed. Somewhere, a hawk cried. Then she said quietly, "They won't let me stay." He looked toward the town, small against the horizon. "No," he said, "they won't." He rose, brushing dust from his coat. "But I can walk you past the ridge. There's a cabin up north. Belonged to the bandit once. Ain't much, but the roof holds." She smiled faintly. "You'd risk your badge for me?" He looked at the star pinned to his chest. The metal was tarnished, edges dulled from years of weather and regret. "I'd risk it to make it mean something again." That night, the sheriff and the condemned woman rode out under a low red moon. The wind chased them across the plains, scattering the last smoke from the burned rope. Behind them, Red Hollow seethed, but no one followed. Not yet. When a man walks away from the law doesn't stop walking. The sun was sinking blood red when they reached the ridge. Wind tore across the plain, bending the tall grass flat like prayer mats before a storm. Mara rode behind the sheriff, her hands gripping the saddle horn, hair wild from the ride. She hadn't spoken since they left the river. There was something in her stillness, a quiet trust, or maybe just the last of her strength holding on. Below them, the valley stretched like a wound, black pines stitched along its edge. The cabin sat half buried in the slope, roof patched with tin, smoke hole gaping like a scar. The sheriff dismounted, his boots crunching dry earth. "This'll do," he said. though he wasn't sure if he meant for her or for the ghosts. He built a fire while she fetched water from the stream. The night came quick, dragging cold down from the hills. The fire cracked, spit sparks. She sat close enough to feel the heat, but not the safety. "You ever been hunted, Sheriff?" she asked quietly. He stared into the flame. "Only by my own conscience." She gave a small, bitter smile. "Then you know the sound of it." Near midnight, the sound came again. Hooves. Far off, faint, but sure as judgment. The sheriff rose, hand to his revolver. Out there, over the ridge, lanterns bobbed in the dark. 5, maybe 6. He could already hear Wexler's voice in the wind. "Bring her back, or don't come back at all." "They'll kill you for this," Mara said. Her tone wasn't fear. It was fact. "I reckon they'll try." He moved to the doorway, eyes narrowing. "You go out the back, take the creek path. It'll hide your tracks for a mile." She didn't move. "And you?" He tightened the strap on his holster. "I'll keep my promise." Yet the first rider reached the clearing before dawn. Harlan waited, rifle resting against the porch post. The men spread out, town deputies, ranch hands, angry and armed. The judge wasn't there, but his will rode with them. "You've lost your damn mind, Pike," one of them spat. "That woman's a curse." The sheriff's voice was low, steady. "You hang her, and you curse yourselves. She bewitched the herd. Burn the rope." "I burned the rope." That stopped them. They looked at him, disbelief twisting to rage. He could see it now, the faces of men who wanted blood, not for justice, but for comfort. The first shot came from the left. It hit the porch post, splintering wood beside his arm. The sheriff fired back once. The man fell from his horse. Silence followed, raw, stunned silence. "Go home," Harlan said. "Ain't nothing for you here." Another man lifted his gun. Before he could fire, a sound split the still air, a low, heavy bray. A mule stood halfway down the slope, refusing to move. The same mule that had carried the town's grain wagon every harvest. It stood between the riders and the cabin, legs planted like stone. No whip, no shout could move it. Something shifted then, tiny, fragile. One of the younger riders lowered his weapon, then another, and one by one, the rest turned their horses. By the time the sun broke the ridge, the clearing was empty, except for the mule, the sheriff, and the thin trail of smoke from the dying fire. He waited until he was sure they were gone, then went to the creek. Mara was there, kneeling in the water, washing blood from her wrists. She looked up when he came near. The light caught the scarred skin, rope burns, raw and pink. He reached out, wordless, and tore a strip from his own sleeve, wrapping it around her wrists. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some scars heal skin, others heal memory. By the third day, the sheriff's badge had lost its shine. The tin star sat on the edge of the porch beside a mug of cold coffee and a coil of rope, the same kind used for hangings. But this one was different. Its end had been burned black. Mara sat on the step below him, her wrists wrapped in his torn sleeve. She was staring at the rope like it held her name. "That the same kind they meant to use?" he asked. She nodded once. "They brand the guilty where I come from. Said it keeps folks honest." He lifted the coil and turned it in his hands. The hemp fibers still smelled faintly of smoke and blood. "That mark don't keep folks honest," he said. "It keeps 'em scared." She glanced at him, her eyes catching firelight. Fear's the only law most men obey. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, walked to the edge of the yard, and threw the coil into the flames. The fire hissed, spat sparks into the night. The smell of burning hemp filled the air, thick and bitter. Mara rose and stepped closer. "You keep burning what's wrong," she said quietly. "Soon you'll have nothing left." "Then maybe I'll be clean again," he said. At dawn, a thin frost glazed the cabin's window. The sheriff found her outside, kneeling beside a patch of dirt near the riverbank. She'd cleared the stones and pressed her palm to the soil. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Planting something," she said without looking up. He frowned. "Ground's too cold. Still worth trying." She looked at him, the ghost of a smile tugging her lips. Outcasts need roots, too. He crouched beside her. The earth was dry, stubborn, like everything else in Red Hollow. She covered the small hole and patted it shut. "What was it?" he asked. "Bean seed," she said. "From my ma's pouch. Been carrying it near 10 years. Figured it was time it saw light?" He nodded slowly. There was something sacred in the gesture. Not defiance, not prayer, but endurance. The kind that refuses to die quiet. Later that morning, as they packed their saddles, a rider appeared, not from town, but from the North Trail. A gray horse, a black coat, dust clinging to the brim of his hat. It was Deputy Elias Crow, the sheriff's oldest friend. The man reined in, eyes hard as Riverstone. "Judge signed a warrant," he said, tossing a folded paper to the ground. "Says you're to be arrested for harboring a fugitive." Harlan didn't pick it up. "And if I don't come?" Crow's hand lingered near his revolver. "Then I bring you back cold. You know I don't miss." The two men stared at each other. 10 years of law between them. Now nothing but a thin thread stretched taut. Finally, Crow said, "Quieter. She worth all that, Pike?" Harlan looked at Mara, standing a few feet away, the morning wind pulling her shawl loose. "She ain't the one on trial," he said. "I am." When the deputy rode away, he didn't fire a shot. But his eyes promised the reckoning wasn't over. The sheriff watched him disappear down the valley, then turned back toward the burned rope, the patch of soil, and the woman who had survived her own hanging. That night, as they sat by the fire, Mara asked softly, "You think the seed'll grow?" He stared at the embers, then at the horizon where Red Hollow lay unseen. "Don't know," he said, "but maybe that's not the point. They buried nothing that day. Not guilt, not ghosts, only a promise that might outlast them." Spring came slow to the valley. The last snow melted like an old lie, inch by inch, until the creek began to sing again. The cabin roof still leaked. The sheriff's badge still lay rusting on the porch. And in the patch of dirt near the river, the one Mara had pressed her palm to, a small green shoot broke the ground. It wasn't much, just a single sprout trembling in the wind. But it was alive. Mara stood over it that morning, shawl drawn tight, the sun catching the silver in her hair. Her wrists had healed, but faint scars traced the skin, pale bands like memory's fingerprints. She touched them now, lightly, as if reminding herself they belonged to her. Harlan watched from the doorway. He'd traded his revolver for a shovel that week, clearing the creek bed, mending the fence. He looked older, not weaker, just done pretending he wasn't tired. "Didn't think it'd take," he said. "Most don't," she replied, smiling a little. "But some do, even when they shouldn't." He stepped beside her. The seedling's leaves were small, delicate, but they clung to the cold air with stubborn grace. He nodded toward it. That's proof enough. She glanced at him. Proof of what? That some things don't die just 'cause the world says they oughta. Later. That week, a letter came, carried by a writer who didn't meet their eyes. The seal was from Red Hollow, the judge's mark. Harlan opened it slow. The words were few. The warrant's void. Deputy Crow's dead. The town has no sheriff. You may return, if you still call yourself law. He folded the paper without speaking and tossed it into the fire. The edges curled. The words turned to ash. Mara watched. You going back? He shook his head. Ain't nothing there to go back to. She looked toward the horizon, then down at the soil again. Then what now? He exhaled, long and low. We build something else. That evening, as the wind moved through the grass, they sat by the porch in quiet. Coyotes called far off. The sky deepened from gold to violet. Mara said softly, You ever think about that boy? The one who spoke up? She nodded. He smiled faintly. Reckon he's the only true lawman Red Hollow ever had. She laughed, not loud, but real. Maybe someday he'll remember that voice. Maybe that's all it takes, Harlan said. One voice to stop a hangin'. One seed to start again. When darkness came, the firelight flickered across their faces. Two figures marked by the same road, neither saint nor sinner. Just people who'd lived long enough to know the cost of silence. The sprout bent under the night wind, but didn't break. And in the hush, between coyotes' cries, the sheriff looked out toward the stars and murmured, almost to himself, Law don't mean much without mercy. Mara turned her face to the wind. Mercy don't mean much without memory. They sat in silence after that, the kind that holds peace, not emptiness. Years later, travelers would still speak of a sheriff who burned his badge and a woman who planted a seed where a gallows once stood. Some said the bean vine grew into a tree that never withered, even in drought. Others said the two rode north and vanished into the mountains. But the old ones in Red Hollow, the ones who still remembered the boy's trembling voice, they'd tell it softer around their fires. Justice ain't always what's written. Sometimes it's what's left to grow. If you ever find yourself holding a rope, a badge, or a grudge, ask which one the wind would carry first.